The youth are passing out some sticky notes, and if you need a pen or pencil, I would grab one, please. And I want to thank you all for sticking around on an absolutely gorgeous day. And I promise I don't really think of you as guinea pigs. So welcome. I'm Vita Konitz. Good morning. And in the back, we have Rick Condon. We are both members of Citizens Climate Lobby and a few other environmental groups that are working on climate change. And we're very pleased to be here with you this morning. Can everyone hear me all right? Yes. Super. So, first of all, we're going to do a little kinesthetic warm-up. I want to ask you some questions, and if your answer is yes, would you please hop up? Is global warming happening? Is it man-made? Is it harmful? Here's a tricky one. Can we do anything to reduce its impacts? Ooh, you're all up. Maybe I should go home. I don't need to do this. How about the last one? Remember when we did the marriage amendment? And I was up here a lot, and I got a lot of people saying, Vita, thank you, you're really doing great stuff. And I said, thank you, but what I really need is for you to join me, not thank me. So are you willing to take action on a personal level, at a community level, to address global warming? Yes. All right, I'm done. Thank you. Very good. Well, just in case you need just a little bit more convincing, I would like to present to you this morning, along with Rick, Preventing Climate Chaos, or Global Weirding, if you prefer, as Thomas Friedman coined it. This is civilization's greatest challenge, and it is also our greatest opportunity. So here we are. This is Katie and Joey. Katie's probably a little embarrassed, but we went out snowshoeing at Christmas time up by my sister's in Duluth, and the snow was amazing. But we could only stay out a few minutes because it was 20 below. It was so cold. And do you remember the Facebook thing? I don't know if you guys Facebook, but I do, where the woman walks, it's a video, she walks out of her house, and it's like February, and she knocks the head off the snowman. She's so mad at winter. It was great. It was like, yeah, we can all relate, right? It was the winter that never ended. We had 6 days off of school. So it's a little bit hard to teach about climate change and global warming when it's so darn cold, right? But we have to look at the bigger picture. Here's that bigger picture. This is January 2014, and when we look at what was going on with our climate, this was the 4th warmest January on record, okay, and the warmest since 2007. So yes, we had some cold snaps in Minnesota that were a little weird, but I especially need you to look at Alaska. See this blue? That's us. We were a little cold, but look at the deep pinks and reds. Alaska was 5 degrees Celsius above normal. They were getting temperatures in the 60s in Anchorage. Okay, so global weirding, right? This is not the way our climate map is supposed to work. On average, the globe was 0.65 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. So yes, there were some cold spots, and we happened to be in one of them, unfortunately. But we have to look at the whole picture, and yes, the world is warming. At the same time, we know that this has greatly impacted California. They are currently still trying to pull out of a drought, right? And here in the United States, you know, if we can't get our vegetables from California, we have enough money, we can instead get it from Mexico, right? But not everybody has that luxury to just switch where they get their markets. So we have seen huge impacts already. Kind of makes you want to, I hope, stop and think. Rick, wake up. Where are we heading as we destabilize Earth's climate? This is a supercell in Montana, massive supercell. Modern civilization has been built with fossil fuels. We need to thank the fossil fuel industries for the luxuries that we have today, for our way of life. We don't need to apologize about it, right? We should all be grateful that we have the standard of living that we have, and we know that fossil fuels are a big part of that. But we don't miss the whaling industry anymore, right? It's time to move on. We need to recognize that it is time for us to move to renewable energy future and transition. Now, some would say that, okay, even if the United States turns to totally renewables, we really need the rest of the world to follow. It's their fault, right? Look at what China's doing. Look what India's doing. They're fast growing. But we need to remember that the CO2 stays in the atmosphere a very long time. So if we look at total emissions, cumulative emissions, what's up there, you can see we are the primary polluter because we industrialized first, right? Before these other nations. Whoops, what was that? So what happens when you put more CO2 into the atmosphere? Well, obviously CO2 is rising. In science class, we talk about the breathing of the planet. Notice it goes up and down. That's photosynthesis, respiration. In the summer, we've got photosynthesis. In our non-growing season, winter, we don't have that, but we still have respiration, which puts out CO2, so it's a little higher. But overall, up. Here's ice age data. Okay, we have this from ice cores. We've gone up and down in CO2 throughout the ice ages and interglacial periods. And then today, of course, it's up, up, and more up. What am I doing? And I was doing my best June Cleaver. When this stuff happens in the classroom, my students love it. It's like their favorite lesson. The best one was when I was trying to do convection, and I broke the container, and I had food coloring and dye everywhere. They're like, yeah, we love that one, Miss Kay. All right. The greenhouse effect. This is physical science. It's the basis of what's going on with our climate. We know that we are thankful for greenhouse gases. It allows us to live on Earth and to have temperatures that are not way below zero every night, way above zero every day, right? It stabilizes our climate. It's the radiation, most of the radiation warms the Earth's surface, and then as it's re-radiated from the surface up as a longer wavelength, that's where our atmosphere is able to absorb it and help keep us warm at night. But our problem is, you add more CO2, it's a very sensitive system, just like hormones. A little bit makes a huge, huge change. It's true. It's a good analogy. So we are adding slight amounts of CO2, to increase that from 180 to 280 parts per million is what the Earth had for 800,000 years. Now we're up at 400 parts per million, 40% increase. This is a very important graph from the IPCC fifth report, which was just recently released. And the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, now says something that scientists very rarely say. Warming of the Earth is unequivocal. You know what that means, right? There is no debate. Earth has warmed. And when we look at climate models and the things that force climate, the only way we can explain the current warming that we are seeing on Earth is if we include man-made greenhouse gas emissions, the CO2 in the atmosphere. So without CO2's effect, this is what our climate would be doing right now. With CO2, we get the increase that we have already seen. They also say we are virtually certain that the top 700 meters of the ocean have warmed. This is also impacting Minnesota. This graph shows that in the last 150 years, Minnesota's climate has warmed. What is it, about 1.5 degrees Celsius, Fahrenheit. So you might think that's not very much, but we're going to look at some of the impacts that this small amount of warming has had. Impacts, here we go. So I borrowed this slide from a presentation. It's Dr. Mark Seeley's data, and this came from the Department of Health. But Minnesota has seen many, many years of higher than normal dew points and temperatures. And you might say, so what? Well, in the US, from 1979 to 2003, more people died from exposure to extreme heat than floods, hurricanes, lightning, tornadoes, and earthquakes combined. Extreme heat is a huge, huge killer. And we've seen some big ones, right? In Chicago, many people died. 700 heat-related deaths in Europe, in France, in Moscow, larger numbers. And this is something that, of course, will only increase as we add more heat and humidity to our atmosphere. We've also seen impact on glaciers. Why is this important? Well, this is a source of drinking water, right? The glacial snow high in the mountains is melting, and we're losing that source for the people down in the valleys that need it for drinking. So here's Peru, 1978. And 2011. Ice that took 1,600 years to form melted in 25. And here is Muir Glacier in Alaska in 1880. And that same spot in, more recently, 2005. This is Hurricane Sandy. I'm sure you remember Hurricane Sandy. This hurricane caused an economic loss of $65 billion. It affected the New Jersey coastline with record flooding. It affected other areas with strong winds. Here's New York. Because of the timing of this hurricane, we had high tide. We have higher than normal storm surges because our oceans are higher. There was a huge amount of loss of life and damage. Minnesota is not immune to these changes. Our climate is becoming weird, more extreme. We are having more extreme rain events, more extreme droughts already. Why? When you add heat to the atmosphere, there is more evaporation. We have 4 to 5% more water vapor in the atmosphere today than we did 100 years ago. This causes stronger, more extreme rain events. More of our precipitation is falling in a smaller number of days, followed by dry periods. Think about it. It's what we've been seeing here. In Minnesota, the frequency of storms with 3 or more inches of rain has increased 104% in the last 50 years. Oh, back one. Flooding, according to the Red Cross, there has been a 300% rise in flood-related disasters globally in just 25 years, from 50 a year to 200. Munich Re, which is one of the 2 largest insurance companies, they know that this is climate change. They understand. Anyone who has made a house insurance bill knows this is impacting all of us. This precipitation is not reliable. Rain patterns are shifting. Our semi-arid regions are becoming more arid. Our tropical regions, the monsoons are growing and becoming more severe. By the year 2020, 75 to 250 more Africans are expected to be facing water stresses due to climate change. Agricultural production is expected to be severely compromised. We're also seeing impact with wildfires. For every 1 degree increase in temperature, we are expected to see a much larger area burned. But wait, there's more.
Oh my God. You're scared? Here? On the side, yeah. Right there. Whoa!
It's not just carbon dioxide, it's methane. As we melt our permafrost area, we are releasing massive areas that have trapped methane in bogs. We are also, of course, releasing methane with our methods of fracking to get natural gas. This is a huge concern. We are releasing methane with coal mining by raising livestock. So methane is a concern because it's 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. It doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, but it is definitely a concern. Other carbon dioxide problems that we are concerned about, of course, are coral bleaching and acidification of our oceans. As we warm ocean water, the coral can't survive. It relies on temperature, on algae. There's an algae that lives in symbiotic relationship with a coral, and it helps it to produce food. And when the ocean water gets too warm, the algae is kicked out and no longer is part of that symbiotic relationship. So we have corals that are bleaching and dying at an alarming rate. We also have problems with the basis of the food chains in the ocean. When we add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, a good deal of that goes into the oceans. The oceans are a great trap of this CO2. And unfortunately, that makes carbonic acid, which is a weak acid, but as we add more and more CO2, the pH of the ocean is dropping. It has already dropped 0.1 on the pH scale and is expected to continue to drop. Organisms that rely on seawater to make their calcium carbonate skeletons will not be able to do it as the pH falls. So we're worried about the whole basis of our ocean food chains. And will humans knowingly destroy entire marine ecosystems? This is a beached whale. We are headed, scientists tell us, for the 6th greatest extinction. Okay, there have been 5 in the past, some caused by meteoritic impacts, some caused by changing climate. There is huge concern that we are in the middle of the 6th, and humans are causing it. Here's that graph I mentioned. We try not to do too much with graphs in these presentations, although as a science teacher, I love them. But you can see over time, we have carbon dioxide temperatures have gone up and down. About every 100,000 years, we have an ice age on Earth. And we can talk more another time about what causes that. That's a lecture. Come to my classroom. And at the same time, we see temperatures and CO2 going up and down together, 180 to 280, 180 to 280, up and down. Here we are today at 400. If we continue another 40 years of emissions, we're going to be at 600 parts per million. And we have not been there in 3 million years, as scientists say. So this, I think, is the most important part of my presentation. What kind of world do you want to leave your children and grandchildren? The choices that we make right now are going to determine the future that your children's children face. If we choose a low energy pathway, we are still going to warm. The CO2 in our climate system is not going to magically go away. Okay? We are going to continue to see impacts, but it's how strong those impacts are. With a low emission pathway, if we can hold emissions at the end of the century to 420, 410, 420 parts per million, in other words, stabilize, right? We're at 400 now. Then we can expect our world to look like this in 2100, where you see warming in degrees Fahrenheit of 1 to 3 degrees in the middle of the Earth, and at the poles, it's still going to be greater. We're still looking at 9 to 11 degrees, which will definitely impact us. But if we do nothing to curb our emissions, remember I said in 50 years we'll be at 600 parts per million? By the year 2100, Earth will be over 900 parts per million CO2. And if I add in the other greenhouse gas equivalents like methane and nitrous oxides, it'll be over 1,300 parts per million. Then this is the Earth that we will be leaving. This is our legacy. Look at the middle part of the Earth where we already have semi-arid, 11 to 13 degrees warmer, and the poles over 15. And again, this is Fahrenheit. And by the way, these temperatures are not relative to the Industrial Revolution, as you sometimes see. This is temperature change relative to 1986 to 2005. So it's not counting the warming we've already seen. So other changes we can expect. This is the same graph just in degrees Celsius, so I'm going to skip it. The bottom one, and again, this is from IPCC 2013 report, shows changes in precipitation. The color's not real great, but you can see with our low emission pathway, notice the colors are not as bold, right? You can tell that we are going to have increasing changing of patterns of precipitation. The equator is going to continue to see rain, and our mid-latitude, 30 degrees north and south, where we have higher pressure, is going to continue to be drier. But much worse, obviously. Our Arctic ice cap with a low emission scenario will be about 50% gone by 2100 in September, and if we do nothing to slow, 100% gone. Obviously, this impacts sea level. Sea level rise as much as a meter with a high emission. That's over 3 feet. So how about drought conditions? We need to be able to grow food. Our population is growing. This shows drought conditions. Remember, 2012 isn't on here, but 2012 there was a huge drought through much of the United States. What will happen in terms of drought conditions? This is the globe. If we do nothing to slow global warming, if we continue on our pathway, I want you to look for the intense dry conditions. Okay, so look at the purple colors and look at the world, and you can see much of the world is going to be severely dry. Again, there will be places where it'll be much too wet also. This is the extremes that we get with global warming, with this global weirding and climate chaos that we are creating. This is an issue of justice and human survival. This is an issue that churches need to address, that schools need to address, that we all need to consider very carefully. This is the chairman of the IPCC report, who has very accurately stated that no one on this planet is going to be untouched by climate change. It will impact our poorest nations the most, and these are the nations that have done the least to contribute to climate change because they live with much more lower carbon footprints, right? But no one will be untouched. More than half the world relies directly. We all need food, okay? So this is kind of a strange thing to say, but I'm talking direct, like as if you can't go out and harvest your food, you're going to starve. More than half the world relies directly on weather-related activities to get their fish, to go out and forage for food, to grow it, to eat. Deforestation is, of course, also a problem. As we cut down trees, we lose a source of climate sink, of absorbing that CO2. And you know, our dogs might be a little upset with us. So I'm a science teacher. I talk about peer-reviewed science. That's important. I just was sent an article by the CEO of Exxon saying this is all a bunch of bunk. You can find people that will tell you we never landed on the moon, that the world is flat, that evolution is made up. Yeah, it's there. It's in the press. We can all find it. But peer-reviewed science, the jury's out. Look, 99.8% of peer-reviewed articles tell us that this is real, this is happening, and we must address it now to avoid the worst consequences. And these are just some of the agencies that confirm man-made global warming, and there's none that don't, basically. So now I'd like to give you some hope. You just saw dire, dire consequences with droughts and floods and inability to grow food. But we have some really smart people here in the United States and around the world that have solutions. We do have the technology to solve this problem. It is not hopeless. This is Professor Mark Jacobson of Stanford's project called the Solutions Project. And Mr. Jacobson, Professor Jacobson, and others at Stanford have put together this project where you just click on your state and it tells you how your state can become fossil fuel free by the year 2050. So let's look. This is Minnesota. So they have found that by 2050 we can switch to PV solar and concentrated PV solar and wind power and geothermal and hydroelectric. We can create 63,000 jobs in operations, 39,000 in construction and operations. We can reduce greatly the amount of carbon we are emitting, and we can save lives. This plan also will help with health benefits. When we have less emissions from fossil fuels, it's not just the CO2, there are other things up there that are cancer causing, right? We're going to save lives. This would be a win-win situation. And again, this group has made a plan for every state in the United States. It is possible now. So if somebody tells you there's going to be some new revolution that's going to come along, yeah, we probably are going to have improvements in technology. We know when we put our mind to it, we can put a man on the moon, right? We can solve many, many problems. But we do have the technology right now to do this. Here's another important institution, Princeton. Princeton did a study that looked at how can we stabilize our climate, and they did it in wedges, where you can look at many different options for reducing our CO2 emissions. Basically, if we do nothing, here's that high emission pathway. If you think of solutions in terms of wedges, each wedge starting small, gradually growing, so that we stabilize and keep our emissions flat to where they are right now by 2050. And some of these wedges are solar and wind, and they include nuclear as an option. But let's talk about some of the other things. Efficiency. Average coal plant efficiency is 32%. We can do better. There are many, many things we can do to generate electricity more efficiently. Our cars, you know, cars in Europe are much more efficient. I remember you saying, Al, when you were in Europe, you had a station wagon that got 60 miles a gallon, right? We don't get that here, and we know we can make improvements. Also more mass transit, right? Using our cars less. Everyone can improve the efficiency of their homes. There's much, much we can do, and much we could do also here at church. Carbon capture and storage. This is costly, but at our greatest emission sources, which would be our coal plants, if we're going to continue to use them, we need to consider this as a way to actually put the CO2 down in the soil and not let it up in the atmosphere. It is being done. There are 3 of these in existence. They are very costly. We do also have natural sinks. Those trees I talked about, the dogs wanting us to keep, well, they're important for other reasons, right? These are a way to absorb CO2 and help reduce warming. We can also change the way we do our agriculture. Have you heard of no-till farming? Farmers do not have to plow their fields several times a year. There are ways to plow and plant all at once and reduce tillage farming, leave the stubble in the field. If the CO2 is in the soil, it's not in the atmosphere, and it can be a benefit. So the take-home message here is, Rick and I will get this worked out. To avoid doubling of our atmospheric CO2, we have to act now. But there are pathways that we can take. We don't have to have that horrible map I showed you with the globe virtually in drought, with massive starvation because we are unable to grow food, because our oceans no longer support fish. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rick, who's going to talk to you about why, if we have these solutions, more is not being done. And then we're going to open up to discussion. I will fix it for you. As Rick is getting set up, I urge you to ask any questions you have, any comments you have for me, that you're going to bring them up after.
Well, I'm very happy to be here this morning. I don't do this very often. As we go through the presentation, you'll probably see why. I'm a little bit unpracticed. I'll start slow and probably... I'll start slow and hopefully calmly, and as we go along, you'll find that I get more and more excited because this is an important topic, and we're all here because we know that it is. But my presentation is talking about creating political will. And as you saw just at the end of Vita's presentation, We saw a lot of technical solutions that may appear bigger than we are. What can we do? There's a whole raft of things that can be done. So how do we engage and motivate, engage in the political process around which issues and how do we engage others? And one of the great things about this audience today is that we all are aware that this is an issue. We are all motivated. So the question is, where are the others that aren't here and how do we draw them into the circle? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before we go in depth, there's a great story. I saw a movie called I Am. And in that movie, there's a herd of deers. And what happens with herds of deers is that they tune their ears to the environment. And gradually, as they begin to point in one direction, they recognize they have a common interest, and they immediately move as a group. And I think humans behave that way too. And so as we get out and communicate with each other, just talk to people, reach out to people that you don't know, find a way to start a conversation, you can begin tuning the ears that begin that perhaps instant change. And I look back at things in history that talk about, you saw how Czechoslovakia, communism fell, led by a poet. You saw communism fall, you saw civil rights, you saw apartheid end because people stood up and talked to each other. And that is one of the biggest ways that we can inspire change and invite the new people into the audience that aren't here today. So with that said, maybe we'll go to the next slide. So originally the slide said climate denial is prevailing. And really, I want some deniers. I want some people that have doubts, and I want people to raise them because that's the chance to invite them in. So I changed the slide. It used to say climate denial, you're still in denial, but I said attitude matters. It's how you approach the question. You don't turn off those deniers. You say, you know what, I'm curious. I'm doubtful, I'm not sure, but tell me more. And so if you approach this question with the attitude of curiosity and encourage people's doubts, you can help allow them in. And that's an attitude that I think is so important. Next slide, please. So this is a study that I absolutely love. And what it does is it lays out a framework for potential action and education and drawing people in. So this is the Yale Climate Project. And if you go to, just Google that, you'll come to this study that they do recurringly over time. It's called the Six Americas Project. And what they do is they break down the US population into 6 major segments. And they use very sophisticated psychological studies to flesh out what are people's attitudes. And then they bundle those the questionnaires into segments, and they use a good scientific process. But what you have here on the far left is the dismissive, then the doubtful, then the disengaged. There's the cautious in the middle, and then we probably have the alarmed and concerned here in the room today. So together, we represent 45% today. We represent 45% of Americans. We might not know that because we aren't talking to each other. We don't know that hope is right over the horizon. But when we start seeing this another 25%, well, let's see, 45 plus 25, we're already in a great big majority. If we can move these people this direction, it's a great thing. And what we want to do is we want to create a stable political will that survives the election cycle. We don't want to have Republicans are in and the EPA is out, and I don't mean to generalize, but there has been that pattern over time. We do know that in the state of Minnesota, they don't believe in the theory of man-made global warming. So if we can gradually shift this whole curve to the right, we are going to create that stability in our political system that allows businesses to invest in technology that will move us to the future with the things that Vita just talked about a little bit ago. A couple things here. One is that we are all embedded in relationships in our lives, right? And we may have a cousin or an aunt that doesn't believe that global warming exists. They are the doubters and dismissives, yet you surround yourself with others. But as you gradually reach out to those people in your family, in your networks, and invite them in, slowly that whole web of people is going to change. It's all going to shift. And you don't have to worry about the dismissives. A lot of times I could find it demotivating to think about, oh gosh, I'm going to bump into one of these guys and I can't possibly overcome those arguments that he might have. He's so in doubt. So what do I do? Well, you don't work on him. You say hi, you say thank you, you engage him, you re-engage him when you see him next. Maybe send a follow-up article. But the point is, work on the people that seem to be curious in the middle, that are open-minded. There are some key questions that you've seen today that the hopeful thing for this, for me out of this is you all could do this presentation. I really think you could. We've been trained in this. We have links to the training calls that we were in. You could do it. And you guys here are on this end. And you could be the front end of the train moving people toward political change. Inviting those next people to move in too. The key questions that they asked underneath the framework of this climate project are, is global warming real? Is it harmful? Is it human caused? What do scientists say? And then last, is it solvable? And what's really cool is that we've covered all 4 of these things today. And so, in theory, if you could take an audience and break them into segments, you'd be able to talk about each of these topics depending on what they were interested in and move those people this direction. So you've seen then an example of that today, and it could be a tool for you. But here's the question, is it solvable? And what happens is, if you look at the data, and maybe we switch slides right now. If you look at the data, maybe switch it again. If you look at the data, you will see that even the people on the alarmist end of the spectrum will say, I just don't know if it's solvable. I know it's a problem, but I don't know if we can get all these people in this crowded subway to all move together. And so we're kind of keeping ourselves stuck because we're in this big crowd and we don't know if everybody else is going to move the same direction. Are our ears turned? And so the key thing is, can we somehow create the political belief and the awareness, shine the light that helps that crowded subway station all move at once? So what we need to do is we need to close the belief gap. And you've already seen the data from Vita about what the scientists say. We have a belief gap. And so if we close that gap, imagine how many more people are going to be shifting to the right side of that last slide, toward the alarmed, the empowered, the concerned. So let's switch to the next slide. So here's the perceived scientific agreement on global warming. As you can see, as you move, and this is alarmed, and this is dismissive. And so you can see a clear correlation between the perceptions of scientific agreement, which is blue, there's a strong belief that there's agreement among scientists, to the people that are doubters and dismissives. So you could see, if you could gradually educate people in this space, they gradually move over toward the hopefulness and the belief that we have to act. Next slide. So, what's up against us? It's the arguments of inertia and denial. And so we all remember these, we're all old enough to remember these pictures, aren't we? Probably not me. I wasn't quite there. I'm on the edge there. But you know, the strategy of doubters is to, and people that have vested interest in the inertia of the present system, is to throw enough doubt so that you guys think, well, this is a really complicated topic. I need to just think about it some more, and eventually maybe it'll become clear. But meanwhile, 10, 15 years has passed, and that's scary. That's scary. We can't afford to allow inertia. We can't afford to allow doubt. And I'll tell you how I've arrived at a personal conclusion. That is, you know, if I've got a cloud of data, and I've got scientists saying this, and I got business interests saying that, and by the way, I'm a businessman. I work for Wells Fargo, and I'm trained in finance and economics. But when I'm dealing with a cloud of data, the way I'm going to sort it out is I'm going to say, when in doubt, err on the side of conservatism. Good scientists recognize the precautionary principle. They realize that the world is far more complex than we can ever completely understand. So when in doubt, err on the side of conservatism. So next slide. We're up against the money. We're up against the Citizens United case nationally. So that allows dark money to flow into these cloaked groups that are really trying to keep the inertia of the present system going. Next slide. So the challenge and hope is, how do we create the political will? And I started this with the story of the deer. And I started also about remembering Czechoslovakia and apartheid and the other great social movements that instantly changed society. So let's change the slide here real quick. So here's the slide where I talked about the perceived solvability. And again, alarmists are on the right and dismissives are on the far left. And surprisingly, in the blue is basically saying, Humans can reduce global warming, but it's unsure and unclear at this point that we will do what it's needed. In other words, we know what to do, but we're unsure that the crowd of us collectively will do it. And that's the part that we're going to solve for. So next slide. Well, yeah, light bulbs can do it. But then VITA and good, thoughtful thought leaders have a whole raft of solutions that we can invest in. Next slide. So it's not the strongest of species, the most intelligent to survive. It's how we adapt. And do we choose to adapt? And I think we can. As working for Citizens Climate Lobby, we believe in a carbon tax, which basically says you need to have a price on carbon. We need to tax the bads. Because then what that does is it levels the playing field and people are paying the real price of fossil fuels, real price of driving, and it means that it creates an incentive for renewable energy to have this fair playing field that they can now start investing with confidence. And it increases the ramping of those renewable alternatives so that we can live more hopefully for our children's future.